My name's Terry Pufahl. I've been a broker for up to years. I am supposed to be retired, but Charla won't let me. I'm still involved with the Contracts and Forms Committee. I've been involved for 15 years, for a long time. That's it. And I'm trying to get off, so at the end of this presentation, if you would all fill in your evaluation forms and ask for me to leave.
I'm Keith Taggart. I'm a managing broker for Coldwell Banker Select in Mustang, and also I'm an attorney. I've been an attorney for 35 years, graduated at the University of Oklahoma, and started my career in real estate actually with title companies. I was in-house counsel for what used to be lawyer's title, and then I moved to Capital Extra, and then shortly after that ended up getting my license through some pressure from the family. My mother's a broker too. So anyway, feel very honored to be part of this committee. Thank you very much for having us today.
Everybody knows Charlie. Charlie, maybe you take this next question. That give everybody kind of an idea of what the process is for going through contract changes. How does the committee work? How is it structured? And what's that process like for contract changes since you're in with all those?
You know, and I noticed a familiar face up there. I just wanted to say hi to Ann Woody, who was my predecessor at the Real Estate Commission. Ann, do you want to say how many years you were with the Real Estate Commission? Forever. You and Terry have been around forever. But it's awkward for me to talk about the formation of contract forms because that actually happened under Ann's watch. And like Terry said, probably about 15 years is when they started meeting. It took a few years for the first round of contracts to come out. But that committee was created to be made up of 5 OAR representatives, right from this association. So Terry and Keith both represent OAR. There are 3 representatives who are appointed by the commission and 3 representatives who are appointed by the Oklahoma Bar Association. That committee meets once a month, very long meetings. We lock the doors and bring in some sandwiches and we just put them to work. The committee looks at any change that is suggested by an industry member. So sometimes people will email the contract forms members directly, sometimes they will email us. But anytime there's a suggestion, we will look at that. So the standard forms that are there, and just a reminder, they're all optional, with the exception of the disclosure form, which is a little bit different. Disclosure and disclaimer are mandated by law, but all of the other purchase contracts and lease agreements are optional. So they do get a lot of use though, because of their involvement through OREC. We also look at what other states are doing. That's something we're working on right now with our cyber fraud forms, some things that are happening in the industry in other states. But really a lot of it is driven just from involvement from people like you. And anytime anyone comes to me and says, well, gosh, I wish you would change that, I promise you, every email we get goes before that committee. And they can attest to it because I make them sit through them all.
We've got questions coming in and they actually mirror some that I already came up with ahead of time, so that makes me feel good about what I came up with here. But let's go ahead and jump in on some of these. One of these that's right up here on the front is talking about earnest money going to the title company. How are we dealing with that? I know the earnest money receipt portion of the contract has been kind of an ongoing process and an issue for people. And there were recently some changes made in the last go-around, but the Contract Forms Committee is continuing to work on that earnest money receipt to take into consideration things like maybe the buyer delivers the earnest money directly to the title company. Their realtor doesn't even see it. So what's the Contract Forms Committee looking at and addressing that issue?
We're looking at it, and it'll be changed because of the practice that's happening right now. We didn't used to have this problem back in the olden days when I was out in the field practicing. But with the way everything is processed now by emails and very little paper processed back and forth, checks aren't hand delivered and stuff. So we're looking at it, and we've spent the last couple meetings trying to change the earnest money receipt form and also also the paragraph about earnest money and extending the time period so it's not attached or included with the offer, that the earnest money will be presented or deposited blank days after such and such. We're struggling with, not struggling, we're debating on how to go about making it as efficient as possible for you guys out in the field. New things ahead for us.
One thing I'd like to add to that is something that we're looking at as a possible change would be some of the seller's rights with regard to earnest money. Right now, the way it is, if earnest money doesn't get paid, you know, like Charla was saying earlier, as far as the earnest money, the fact that if earnest money has not been paid, then the general belief is that there may be a breach of contract. It's not that you don't have a contract, it's that you may have a breach of contract. Well, what can a seller do if that happens? Right now, you know, if someone doesn't pay the earnest money and the contract says that they have delivered it with the offer and they haven't paid it and they don't pay it, what can the seller do? Well, right now, not very much other than to sue for breach of contract. So we're looking at some possible language that would give some teeth to the seller and possibly even a notice to cancel or another right to cancel if the earnest money is not delivered. And so I see lots of heads shaking yes. I think that probably could help resolve a lot of issues right now with the earnest money delivery. But then, and again, too, I think we're going to see some improvements with the earnest money receipt as well. And address a lot of those issues later on with the new funds.
I hope I get a lot of head nods for this. We're taking the earnest money receipt page out of the contract. Yay! No?
Yay.
Thank you, Joe. And you know how when you download the contract, the acknowledgement page is page 101, but it's not part of the contract. We put that there just so you don't forget it. That's kind of what we're anticipating with earnest money. It'll be page 1 of 1, but it'll download at the end of the contract. So that should alleviate some of the lender concerns about having all those blanks signed, because it's really an internal tracking mechanism. Monica Whitrock, who's on our committee, is always button, who's got the button, who had the earnest money, and where did it go? And that's really what the purpose of that form is, so you don't get to closing and realize that earnest money check is still in your file, because we'll know who did it. So I think that will also be very helpful to some of the questions we're getting out there.
One of the biggest changes,
So keep in the verbiage that you're talking about, where it would be a breach of contract, that it's not delivered, something like that, is it gonna be kind of mimic what's in the financial addendum, that if they haven't ordered the appraisal, then the seller has X amount of days in writing, that they can demand that it's done within 3 days, and if not, then it's a voided contract?
The language, yes, is very similar. The difference in the language that we're looking at, the difference is that there's no grace period with the earnest money like there is with the financing supplement.
Okay, thank you.
It's not automatic either. It's not automatically canceled. It's an option of the seller. The seller has the option to give a notice of cancellation.
In writing.
In writing. And we're looking at, the cancellation form where the top is a buyer's right to cancel and the middle part's a seller's right to cancel. We would just simply add that as another reason for the seller's right to cancel.
talking about all these time frames as well, and I do kind of want to jump back to a change that was made in this last contract, because it was a pretty major contract by adding time as of the essence back into the contract. And I know there were a lot of questions and a lot of differing opinions, and so I think this would be a good opportunity for at least a couple of the people who are on the contract forms committee just to talk about that a little bit. How did that get in, and how do you think that's working out at this point, and why do you think that might be important to have in the contract?
Well, I guess I'll be the first to talk about this, because time is the essence. I'm a little bit to blame for this, because to me it was a very big deal to have in the contract. If you have, and just in practice of the administrative processing of the contract, after you have a contract, if someone misses a deadline, what is the result? Well, is it a breach of contract or not? Well, the parties to each other, they get in front of the judge, and then this is where it becomes important. Without the language, time is of the essence, the parties end up in front of the judge, and the judge determines whether or not the breach was reasonable. And so, was it reasonable to be a day late or 2 days late on one of the obligations in the contract? That's going to be, if we don't have that language in there, it's determined by a judge. And one judge may be different from another judge. The evidence is presented in one trial may be different than another trial. So for me, especially as a broker, there was no clarity to the administrative processing of the contract. So I would like to be able to tell the clients, look, we have missed our deadline. Therefore, either we waived our right or we are subject to further obligations here. So to me, it gave more clarity. Part of that, I'm from Oklahoma City, and I think historically, the old Oklahoma City contracts before OAR got involved with the contracts have historically had times of the essence from day one. I think that, there is a difference, this elephant in the room, there's a difference between Oklahoma City and Tulsa as far as we're concerned on this particular topic. But to me, that's what it amounts to, it comes down to the administration of the process.
Keith, thank you for jumping in front of the bus on that one. We've had some questions come up, and I prefer the way that Steve has worded it here. Would everything go up in flames if we just did away with earnest money? Some states don't really have any provisions for earnest money. Has the committee ever considered it? Do you think it would be a good or a bad idea? Kind of what's your take on earnest money and whether that's necessary or important these days?
I consider this at every single meeting when we look at the earnest money receipt form. Like I've said it. I don't know if you, in Oklahoma, you have that expectation. And unfortunately, sellers have that expectation too. And they see the amount of earnest money, they tie that to the seriousness of the buyer. It would be a very, very big shift. I don't know if the world would go down in flames though. I don't. Steve's got to follow up in actual words.
So, yes, they have that expectation that the amount of earnest money is goes along with how serious they are about the contract. But if they get at odds with each other, if it's explained further to the seller, they know how easily that earnest money will just go away.
Right, the seller, it's going to be harder.
Unless
that
they
portion
want
of the contract is buyer friendly.
Right.
It's going to be
Oh,
really hard for the
definitely.
seller to get that.
Until after inspections. But even so,
Right.
at that point, if the earnest, or they get at odds with each other, go, mediation or file a suit, the seller's property is held captive unless they return the earnest money. So it really doesn't matter how much or how serious or what
Right.
they thought when they wrote the offer.
We've never really, we talk about it, but I don't think we've ever examined it seriously. And I don't know really how licensees feel about it. Some licensees would think that's very progressive, and some licensees would hate that. So I think it would just require a lot more industry feedback. But, Arkansas is one where they don't really do earnest. Are any of y'all licensed in Arkansas? You just hear rumors about what's happening over there. Well, no, we do have a lot of licensees who are licensed in other states, and they do bring those things back to us. I've heard pros and cons from over there. Some people really like it. Some people aren't so crazy about it. So, and I think it would just be something that would need to be industry driven, bringing it to us, but I don't know that there's a consensus out there.
And I just have a comment to add to that too. Remember that every aspect of earnest money is negotiable. Whether or not you have earnest money, it's up to the parties. It's not up to us. How much that earnest money is, it's up to them. They can negotiate that back and forth. Who holds the earnest money? It's negotiable. So as far as dictating to the parties what can be negotiated or what not, I think we as a committee kind of hold back on that and don't really direct any policy as to how people contract or how much they do or whether they do. So anyway, I saw a hand up there.
One thing I'd like to mention in this is ORC's guidelines say consideration. They don't reference earnest money. Earnest money is not required. Only our contracts say what's agreed on. It can be an item, it can be a tractor, a fur coat, it can be whatever they want to do. And I think people get hung up on the fact of it has to be earnest money. It says consideration, and whatever the parties agree on is the consideration that is for that particular agreement. So you don't have to have it now.
I agree with that, yeah. Yes.
Okay, now I was taught, this has been many years ago, perhaps it's changed, that there are 6 essential elements to a real estate contract. You gotta have a buyer, you gotta have a seller, you gotta have a property description, you gotta have a purchase price, you have to have a closing date, and you have to have consideration.
Yes, good, I'm glad you brought that up. Consideration, remember, from even pre-license school, we're taught that a real estate contract is a bilateral contract, and it is a promise in exchange for a promise. And the law says that a promise is adequate consideration. And the amount of that consideration, the law does not question. But a promise for a promise, both parties agree, both parties sign, you have a contract. The earnest money is just one obligation of many in a real estate contract.
So can it be 0?
It can be 0, yes.
It can be an item, it doesn't have to be money.
Right.
If the parties agree.
Too big to afford to live.
I've got a tractor, I've got a ring.
You better keep track of that, go to bed.
I'm getting that title company for that go.
I'm just a little confused because it says in the contract, if there's a dispute in the contract, the broker, and the last resolution of that dispute is the broker, and the other 3 have been gone through, that the broker, escrow holder, can make that decision. What if it's at a title company? Who then makes that decision? The title company, and it's a jurisdiction, and we're running for the real estate.
They want a release.
Title companies are not regulated by the commission. And so they don't have to follow those.
Are we covering our customers by putting it in a title company? No.
I'm one of those brokers that believes that in brokers having escrow accounts, brokers holding the earnest money. I do know from talking to title companies, any title companies here, I ask what happens with the money if nobody agrees on a release. And it's after 5 or 6 years, they turn it over to the state of Oklahoma. So,
But if we're not explaining that to our client when we write that contract, that's not the right thing. Because we're saying in this contract, there's these 4 ways that there's a dispute. But if it's at a title company, that last one doesn't matter.
You're right. I mean, it's in the contract, and that was put there just because when I first started in real estate, almost every broker, I'll get to you next time, almost every broker held that. And then it seemed to shift, where everyone was putting it at the title company, which is weird because our code and rules still say today that the broker has to be a signer on the account where that's held. Well, y'all aren't all signers at the title company, but the commission has held that was okay. But it's almost, and this is just anecdotal, not data, I see more brokers getting back to that. And maybe it's for that reason, but I think that if they are holding it at the title company and we have not had a case or complaint on that it's just part of your responsibility as a broker to explain that, what that means. Because so often it's just that checked, or you put where the money is going to be held. And in theory, the buyer and seller agree to that. But there very well could be a situation where the seller said, well, I didn't understand what that meant and what my remedies were going to be. But I do see, again, just anecdotally, it kind of coming back to where brokers are holding that again, which pros and cons, I don't know. But Keith is right in that title companies, if they're title insurance companies, they do have some regulation, but just companies, closing companies are not licensed at all. And Scott had his hand up first, so I let him go first.
I was just going to say that there are, other than waiting 4 or 5 years and turning it over to the state, there's other things in place. You can do interpleaders, there's all sorts of stuff that you can do. So, and then the other side of that is that, yeah, some of us don't have them and some of us do have them. But if somebody's got one and they're writing an offer, just keep it at your own place. It's part of, I mean, it states there in the contract. If you don't like it going to a title company, you know, you can always keep it where you want to. Where it is.
The question too has to be asked, why is it going to a title company? I've not been in the field for a long time, and I haven't been in my office for a long time monitoring all the contracts, but I'll bet you that 99% of the times that it's written in to go to XYZ title companies because the selling agent suggested to the buyer that that's where we ought to put it. The buyers, in my opinion, don't have a desire to put their earnest money with a title company. It's because of the direction, in my opinion, of the selling associate says, let's put it with ABC title company.
I was just gonna say that, you know, we've been moving back towards the trust account, and putting it in there, because I'd called the title companies that we work with, and they said, we don't have a remedy for what we do, like wait 15 days, mail the last address of your intention. Those remedies aren't available to them. And so I said, well, what are we supposed to do if we have a disagreement? She goes, well, if you think that's gonna happen, then you probably need to put it at your trust account. I'm like, well, how do we know until it happens? But, so we've been doing it, but now I'm having listing agents who are like, where's my earnest money receipt? Page 6 is your earnest money receipt. That my signature saying I put it in that account is the receipt. No, that's not the receipt, I need your receipt. I mean, we need a little bit more education on how people use the trust accounts, and that page 6 is that receipt. They're not obligated to send it. I said, well, I've got this little piece of paper I wrote on it. Oh yeah, send me that. That's what my office requires.
Do you think they were wanting the deposit slip? Because
They were wanting a deposit slip. I was not comfortable sending a deposit slip over like that, and so I have an internal form that has my, you know, where it is and what day it's supposed to close. It's just something that I keep track of for my accounting. And I said, I guess I can send you this, and he said, okay. And he said his company required an earnest money receipt. You know, and I'm not trying to argue with somebody, but you know, we just need some more education, especially if we're gonna kind of move back towards that.
Okay, I'm gonna say this, about the earnest money being held at the title company and then doing an interpleader, it would be my understanding that if the parties didn't agree, and so the title company has the earnest money, then they agree to go, they're gonna go to interpleader. The title company is a broker. I will go to interpleader. I go to small claims court. I love it. It's like being at the water deposit place on Friday night, you know, at the Midway at the state fair. I go to interpleader, but the title company is not gonna go to interpleader. They're gonna send their attorney to go to interpleader. So a portion of that buyer's expected deposit, in the way I see it, is going to evaporate into legal fees, and so that would be another reason why I would prefer to hold the earnest money rather than see it go to a title company.
Well, I think you're kind of indicating something that I see a lot of in earnest money disputes, that the amount of the earnest money ends up being so small that it just becomes uneconomical for anyone to do anything about it. If it's $500, well, if you're gonna hire Keith to go after it for you, he's probably gonna charge you $750. So what do you get? Now, if it's $5,000, right? I mean, maybe that's more worth it, but in most cases, it seems like your average transaction is pretty small. So then you have this weird economic decision that it's just not worth it for somebody to fight about it.
Unless it is $5,000 and it changes to $10,000, and then the seller doesn't want to return the earnest money, and the buyer thought he only put $5,000 up, and the title company begins to be the mediator of that issue, and they wrote each a check for $5,000, and the problem went away.
That's one way to solve it.
A question. If a broker has no trust accounts, does OREC still do an audit before
actually a checkbox you would check and sign that you don't hold property for others.
That's why a lot of brokers don't have trust accounts.
Well, it's not a requirement in our code and rules. The only requirement is if you hold the property of others.
But us that do, we've got to face an audit.
You do.
And so if you don't want to face an audit, don't have one, let the title company do it.
Or just, don't steal money so your audit would be clean. That's always an option. The audit is pretty straightforward. We don't, it's not an extensive audit. We don't come to your office with the Darth Vader music, which we're totally gonna do now. It's actually a mail-in audit. You send us some copies, we look at it. It's not a cumbersome process, I don't think. You only do it every 3 years, and the vast majority of those are fine. The ones that aren't fine, you probably want us to catch. So.
Yeah. Can we go to the question at the top of the
Yeah, so I wanted to switch gears a little bit, and obviously earnest money is one of the biggest issues that I hear about kind of in the industry. A lot of disputes and a lot of confusion. One thing I would suggest is as the new earnest money receipt comes out that you'll be seeing in the coming months, take a look at it, take a look at the changes in the early pages of the contract that address earnest money. If you look at that and say there are still issues out there, there's a great group of people in the contract forms committee, but it's still a small group. And if you have some ideas, absolutely submit those. And same thing if you think that there's some regulatory issue that OREC hasn't addressed or should be addressing differently, there's actually a process where you can submit a request for rulemaking, and they pretty much have to hear it. They have to at least take a look at it. So that's something that having people in the industry getting engaged in that process, and again, earnest money is one of these areas that there are just repeated issues that come up over and over. So having that engagement from people that are out there doing this day to day that may have some good ideas, I think is really important for these guys when they're looking at those contracts.
I just wanted to add one more thing real quick that I didn't mention in the process. This year, the contracts will be released January 1st, not November 1st. We're gonna put them out in October, so the industry does have a little bit more time to give feedback. I know some of you may be so eager to use them already, and November 1st will come and you'll say, where are they? But they'll come out at October in our meeting. That's one of the things we'll be discussing, and then we're going to solicit feedback prior to implementation in January.
We had this question up here at the top that changed. Was it the mineral rights one?
Yes.
So one of the questions, and I know the committee kind of looked at this a little bit earlier this year, is why don't we take mineral rights automatically included out of the contract, or show some sort of a checkbox, whether it's included or not, that right now the contract is just kind of written where mineral rights are included. So what do you guys think?
We've been back and forth 47 times on that. We had it, we didn't have it, we had it, we didn't have it, we changed it. We're not talking about it to my remembrance of doing any other changes on this at this point.
Why?
Just because we've had it that way before.
Well, it's fine, Steve. You've got it on your land and recreational forms. There's 2 boxes there.
Yeah, we're not planning to do anything on the residential. Just
Why?
because it's there. I mean, if we do anything, we're gonna change it back to not being included, and then we have the challenges of not having included, so if we leave it the way it
Terry,
is.
what's wrong with the checkbox? It's like a land.
It's there, I mean, it's included. It's included.
And let's reserve.
What buyer is not gonna want it? So it's always gonna be checked, right?
What seller
What
wants to
seller
leave
wants
it
to
up?
keep it?
Well, then, see what we're talking about right here? Which way do you wanna go?
Checkbox, 2 of them. Yes, it goes,
Okay,
no, it doesn't.
how many don't want a checkbox? You know, it's just,
How many does?
so I'm not trying to be argumentative. We definitely will take that into consideration then. I mean, this is a discussion we have, guys, is that for whatever we do, there's so many people that don't want it changed and do want it changed, so but we'll definitely put that on the agenda and discuss it some more.
I do have one comment to add to that. It did come up one time since I've been on the committee, and it was mentioned that most residential owners in most transactions, the sellers don't know if they have minerals or not.
That's right. I think that is true.
With most of them, it is. There are a few that do know. And those that do know probably tell you when you list their property, and you probably put something on MLS about the minerals are reserved. So in those cases, you can put the special provisions the way you want to. But by and large, most people don't know if they own minerals or not. So if you have the checkbox, minerals or not, just like Terry said, the buyer's always going to go for it. And then the seller, you've introduced something into the negotiation process that the parties don't even know if they have them or not. And in most cases, if something's been developed since 1950, if a labor has been developed since 1950, the developer kept the minerals. But anyway, yes.
Keith, in my opinion, mineral rights in the state of Oklahoma are worthless until you have to buy them back. for a
That's
fine.
right.
So we need a yes or no box there, so we can at least open up that negotiation. And it's a simple fix, guys. It's not, you don't have to do a lot of studying on it. The land and recreational form is, it's worded perfectly on that.
I know that in the last 10 years that my office has purchased minerals on at least 10 transactions.
They're not cheap, right?
After closing, they're not cheap. But at the same time, the commission is looking after the general public when we're doing these contracts.
How?
Well, in those cases, like I said, most buyers and sellers don't know if they have them or not.
Or care.
Or care. But they're looking at buying a house. Their main focus is to buy a house. And that's what the form is concentrated on, is buying that house, not buying the minerals.
I think it would be more clear to the public if it were a choice. That was kind of my take on it, is just because we don't want to discuss it or negotiate it doesn't make it more beneficial to the public. I think the public needs to know, are you getting them or are you not?
Mhm. Well, in the law, Charla just whispered to me a minute ago, the law in Oklahoma is that the minerals transfer with the surface unless there's special language to the contrary. So that is the general law, and always has been in Oklahoma. If you're
I'm wearing my stress ball out here. My brain's getting sore. So just take a look at it, guys, if you would, please. Thanks.
You bring up again, Jim, because you and I emailed about this a while back, and I took it to the committee. There's also some hesitancy on the part of the committee to have something out there a year and change it right back. Because we like to get some feedback of how it's really working, and when you keep changing it back and forth.
Well, we've been this way for quite some time.
I think it's been 3. Yeah. It seemed like we went back and forth a lot on it though at
We never
first.
had the boxes though.
We did on that other form, but not the residential.
It's all right.
We have not had the boxes. And as one of the committee members said earlier, I can't remember which one of you it was, you're setting up a process where you're gonna have a counter to every single offer.
So be it.
So, well, you say so be it, you Jim say so be it, we got 18,000 gyms out there. So some gyms are not gonna be so be it, some gyms are gonna be like, what have you done to my contract that I use and I love? So, I mean, it's just something we're trying to balance out, but I think it's great that Terry and Keith are here to hear this from other brokers, so we will definitely take that back to the committee.
Thanks.
You can't imagine how many times we hear about complaints when we put a box in the contract, because there's something for the associate to remember to check off or not check off. So that also goes into our consideration, but definitely, I'm hearing what you guys are saying.
Yeah. But right now,
We'll make sure we put it on the agenda.
right now, Terry, the way it's written, it just kind of flows right in there with all the
We
everything and
understand.
stuff.
We'll take another look at it.
Oh, please do.
Again,
Thank you.
and again.
And you've got a suggestion here that,
Another thing too, if you look at the standard form deeds, the language copies the deeds too, because we had input from the title companies at the committee level. And the title companies were very concerned. When we did it the opposite way, that's in the opposite way from their standard deed forms. And actually, title companies got burned quite a bit when they did make those changes, because they missed those changes. But anyway, so I'll hand over here.
I was just gonna say, I think the choice protects everybody. The consumer, the one that's not, that doesn't know, gets educated, the realtor that fails to do and pay attention, and if you have something to ask, then you're protecting everybody by giving a choice.
Ask it in the seller's disclosure form.
That's an interesting one. A choice.
and we've we've got a suggestion here that perhaps there could be an addendum for those scenarios where you want to look at it. So these are the kinds of suggestions as well. You got to make sure you send in so that the committee actually sees it, because truly, obviously this is a big issue. There's really not that much engagement that comes into the contract forms committee. It's not like there's 20 emails and letters come in and saying, you guys need to look at this. I mean, this is something that typically what happens is they say, well, somebody told me about this issue, let's talk about it. And then they kind of wrestle back and forth, but having the actual engagement from people out there, that the number of hands that came up that said, we'd like to see checkboxes, I don't think anyone's actually ever sent that request in, so.
Hey,
Okay, I'm just saying.
No, Jim sent that in about a year ago.
Okay.
So it might have been before you were with OAR.
Probably.
My years blend together, Jeff.
Me too.
Does Texas do the addendum? Is that the one you sent me, or is Texas checkbox? You sent me one from Texas. Was it a mineral rights addendum? I remember. But you had said either a checkbox, and I think that Texas has a separate addendum. But
All I
we did.
remember is Otis Spunkmeyer muffins.
Why do you bring that up?
I don't know.
Inside joke. Anyway, we did look at it, and we will look at it again, so.
That's all we know.
There's a hand up right here.
How many issues have you had with the wind rights? I had an incident that I had some land selling, there was multiple family members, and one was from Texas, and they were selling it, and he wanted to retain the wind rights. Have you guys had any issues or any, that was a big hurdle.
We have not had any.
We don't
No, you,
Well, the contract is, surface rights and,
to the stars above. To the stars above.
Scott is holding his, I'm not in charge of calling on people though, I'll give you the check.
Is our goal to handle all those questions in the time frame we have?
Probably not. We're gonna do the best we can and try to hit some of these highlight areas.
Okay,
So
I was
Scott,
concerned about that.
Go to you real quick.
I hate to say this, but I kind of agree with what Joe said, which is, what if we put that on the property condition disclosure? What if we put something about mineral rights? And the reason I say that is because I don't like Jim's idea of putting a checkbox, because in a market like today, where you have multiple offers coming in on houses, if I check mark for my buyer that they want the rights and there's no rights to be had, and he puts that, they didn't check mark for the rights, I'm gonna get a counter. They might just accept that. My person's lost out, the public has lost out on kind of fair stuff, but what if it's on the property condition disclosure?
Here's Charla's trademarked property disclosure rant. The purpose of the property condition disclosure form is to disclose defects.
Okay.
Defects is defined in the Residential Property Condition Disclosure Act. We've had a tendency in the past few years to really try to make that form a catch-all. It's something the committee struggles with, but you're going beyond the purpose of that form. A better place for it might be in the listing agreement for the seller to disclose whether they own them or not, or do not know. So that might be the more appropriate place for it. But I just have a philosophical protection of that portal disclosure form. It's not a historical property information form. It's to disclose defects in the property.
So I'd like to switch gears here a little bit. We can talk about this for a while, and Steve's got another question up here that kind of, I think, will be possibly one that people are interested in. A couple of years ago, the contract changed to remove the repair cap in the treatments, repairs, and replacements section. How has that gone? Is there any discussion about adding that back in? And I'm sure that people will have some strong feelings about that particular issue.
I have not heard of any major problems that anybody's had since we've removed the repair cap. I have heard compliments for taking it out and streamlining it. If in fact it is a problem, then we need to hear about it, but I think that the majority of the people out across the state of Oklahoma have liked that particular change. Am I wrong?
I hate it.
There you go.
You get the entire inspection report on the TRR.
That's what I see.
Writing, 400 things. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Why?
Because they think they are entitled to
Why?
everything.
Yeah.
That's just silly, guys. I'm sorry if you're doing that and it's
I'm
into your
getting
direction.
it as a
but
listing.
It's just,
What she said
everything on the inspection report on a TRR.
She said that the TRR is being submitted to the seller with the complete inspection report attached
As repair.
as needing repair, which is okay, but silly, in my humble, gray-haired, fat opinion, stupid, that practice is. This is a whole discussion right here, guys, and we could take 2 days talking about it. Selling associates need to take control of the situation and say this is not the way to go. You want to buy a house, Mr. Buyer? Let's take care of the 1, 2, 3 things that need to be taken care of. And let's buy, you're not buying, even with a new home, you see a lot of stupid things being asked. See why I need to get off this committee? I just have some things are, it's just silly. And
You know, this is something that I've actually seen quite a bit of, where, you know, the contract really contemplates that these are defects with the property that we're trying to correct, right? If there's a crack in the heat exchange in the furnace, okay, well, maybe that's a defect that needs to be fixed. But you get all these cosmetic things that come in, or what you think is cosmetic, right? But the problem is, what do you do about it, right? There's no way to really resolve that dispute. You can say, all you're asking for are cosmetic things, so I think you're breaching the contract because you're not complying with the terms that say it has to be only for defects.
which goes back to the early comment about educating our associates and educating our associates and educating our associates. Have that discussion so that the associate can take control of the offer situation and explain to the buyer how ridiculous this is going to be, and do you want to buy this house or not? If you want to buy this house, let's get down to the real needs here and not this crap about cosmetic stuff, minor stuff.
Right. So, you know, it's how you manage those buyers' expectations and then go through that negotiation process is the tough part, because even if they're asking for cosmetic things, you're just stuck in that negotiation process, and there's not really a contractual way to fix that, and the contract addresses it. It's just,
When you ask yourself, do you want to bust a contract over $300 worth of caulking and sealing? Really? And then you're stuck doing it. It's a nightmare.
It is.
You gotta put yourself in the buyer's position, though. They get this 20-page report and they get scared. You have to educate the buyer up front that the inspector's job is to pick at every little thing and give you expectations on how long the system's gonna last, blah, blah, blah. And what we're gonna do is pick out what's in the contract. Most important.
we've got a couple commercial questions here that we can address real quick. So one of them, is there a disclosure form for commercial properties? And Charlie, you mentioned disclosure. I don't know if you guys want to touch on why that is as well.
Oh gosh, I don't know why.
They don't.
It's not required.
Probably. I mean, I think when that law was passed prior to 1996, 95, buyer beware. And I think the legislature kind of looked at it as a protection for the vast majority of their constituents, because not everyone will buy a commercial property, but everyone's going to sleep somewhere. I'm not a renter. But it's just more of protecting, you know, people in their largest investment. But you're right, they don't sleep there. It's harder because in commercial, you might not have that knowledge of the property. We're assuming that as a residential owner, and this is another thing I want to say, y'all are filling out the disclaimer when you shouldn't. Your sellers are filling out the disclaimer.
That's right.
I have to tell a personal story. I'm selling my childhood home right now, which I did live in, but I moved out in 1990. But the house is in bad shape, and I was having to make disclosures on it, and I'm like, gosh, who took away the unknown boxes? This form is terrible. I'm like, oh yeah, that was our committee. So I told Jenny this. I was like, unknown. But anyway, if you know even one thing, doesn't matter if you haven't lived there in 20 years, you fill it out. So that's just a side note. But I really think that's why it is on commercial. The owner might not have that intimate knowledge, so it would be difficult. I don't know, Joe, do you know other states that have a commercial disclosure?
Well, there's no law that requires it, so that's why it's not there.
No, I know that in Oklahoma. I was just asking in other states. Most states do have a residential disclosure. That's pretty common. I don't know of any that do a commercial disclosure.
Many of my owners live in other states.
Right. So they don't have that
They don't
knowledge.
have
Yeah.
any knowledge of it.
I think that was the difficulty in it, so.
Okay, well, we're on this second, the land in.
You know, the committee has actually looked at doing a land disclosure. It's something we looked at that would be optional, I mean, we would have to do a statute change to make it mandatory. We have looked at other states, but again, sometimes issues like earnest money take priority in that year and occupy your life,
Are
but.
little boxes,
I'm sorry?
or little boxes.
No little boxes, no. It will not be a checkbox form. It will be a long essay type form. You have to write it in.
Speaking of checkboxes, on all commercial forms, can general warranty deed be changed to special warranty deed or checkbox? Has the committee really looked at type of deed or anything on commercial forms? Has that come up for the committee before?
It has not.
So I'm going to submit your request in, and maybe they'll take a look at that.
That's another point that is typically negotiated between buyer and seller and buyer and seller's attorneys. Some attorneys are fine with one and not fine with the other. And you get to the other side of the equation and those guys are not fine with one and the other side. So it's just ongoing negotiations. Part of the deal.
I will make a note and we'll take that to the committee.
Are we within our rights? Like, I know that if somebody's owned a rental property for 20 years, they know what's been going on at that house. Can you go back, are we within our rights to say, hey, we don't think you should build one of these out, we're not gonna need a full property disclosure? Because it's obvious that you shouldn't have allowed your seller to fill out an exception.
I'll tell you from my perspective, you're absolutely within your right to go ask for it. They may stand their ground and say, nope, we're not going to do it. Potentially, does that open them up to liability if then there is some defect they should have disclosed? Now you have to go through the process of now we're going to have to sue them and allege that they should have done a disclosure. We asked them to. They didn't disclose it. Now they're liable for it. I mean, potentially, if they should have filled out the form and did, then they're opening themselves up to liability.
Write it in the contract that it's to be delivered.
What?
You could write it in your offer that it's to be delivered.
Okay, so
Filled
you
out
can't do that.
seller's disclosure, make it a part of the negotiation.
You just don't have much recourse if they say, nope, we refuse, we're not going to do it. Either you don't put the offer on, don't go through the contract, or wait till afterwards and sue them if you think you might have a case.
Yeah. It makes me crazy though, people don't fill this out.
I have just a quick,
Completely remodel the house.
Yeah. And they owned it for 20 years.
I have just a quick comment too about this, the disclosures that we're talking about. You know, the statute says that if the seller discloses a defect, then they're released of liability for that defect. So the form really
So why not?
benefits a seller a whole lot. Whereas a buyer, it doesn't really mean that much to the buyer because the standard is actual knowledge of the seller. And how are you going to prove actual knowledge? If you're going to prove misrepresentation, you can say, well, there was a plumbing leak and they said that there wasn't. Well, then you have to prove that they had the actual knowledge of the plumbing leak, which is a very hard thing to do in court. So I'm not sure that you get that much from a disclosure, to tell you the truth, as a buyer. But as a seller, you sure do.
Yes, ma'am.
On disclosure, and I've had this within the last 30 days, you have an accepted contract, you have inspections, you have some major problems, then the deal falls through. Isn't the realtor, the listing realtor, obligated to disclose? What we're seeing is that they don't disclose, they just put it back on the market.
Yeah, the seller doesn't want to disclose,
I
the
want
realtor
to
has to.
jump back to what I just said. The standard for the seller and the standard for a realtor too, or licensee, is actual knowledge. Not should I know about a defect, or does this impose a liability on me to disclose it? It's do I have actual knowledge of a defect? If I don't have a lot of faith in an inspector, and an inspector tells me something and I don't believe it, I don't have actual knowledge of it. Actual knowledge is a standard for disclosure.
Yeah.
That's
And
very,
you're saying actual knowledge is hard to prove, so just let them put it back on the market.
It's like experience.
They should fill out a new form, and if they don't disclose it on the new form, you know. If you as the licensee know and the seller does not disclose, you as the licensee are gonna have a duty to disclose. Actual knowledge is difficult to prove. It is. You would go down a paper trail and the judge still has to determine that. But I always advise a licensee to err on the side of disclosure.
It's not your listing, is what I'm saying.
Okay,
That's where
I
I'm
apologize,
running
Jerry, I thought it was your listing.
I
Okay.
told my realtor, unless you list the property, there's nothing you can do.
I mean, you'd have to prove that they have reviewed the inspection report and verified. I mean, there are certain steps you would have to take to prove it, but I'm always gonna advise disclosure.
So it's not enough to give them the inspection report?
We won't make that determination because it's gonna be in court. I would say yes, common sense would say yes, but Jerry, a judge could say no. That's my problem with, I wish I could say yes, and again, I'm always going to tell you to disclose. But just like with the contract, that's gonna be a civil matter. I think it would. It's a paper trail, but, it would literally be up to a judge.
We could get this question here. Medical marijuana is coming. What is OREC looking at? Is anything in the contract form? Has this come up yet?
We talked about it last month, as a matter of fact, and it's still on the future discussion table, because which way do you jump? We don't know. We don't have any experience as to what the new law is going to counter as far as contractual challenges. We talked about it specifically regarding property management and what's going to happen in the leasing environment. So it's on our agenda. We're going to continue to talk about it. I don't know when a resolution to anything, because there's what are we resolve at this point. So yes, it's being discussed, but nothing of definitive nature at this point.
Ms. Payne?
Can we ask as ORAC looks at those things and brings forth ideas of how we need to deal with that those come to us either in broker form or some kind of communication, or if we experience issues, to encourage people to give those back, because I can foresee it being a pretty big issue, especially in the property management area. That, when you list something and you go and there's, plants everywhere, and are you disclosing those things because it may affect the next person and their health? I mean, there's all kinds of things that can come of that, I think, so.
Just Jeff and or Jessica is at every contract forms meeting. So we're always actively soliciting input from OAR. I would hope that OAR would maybe be the vehicle to streamline that feedback. And part of the reason we don't release the contracts every month is that we go full circle. We did it on the earnest money receipt at the last meeting. We thought we were done, and I was like, oh, it's terrible, I hate it. And then 2 hours later, I'm like, I love it. So if we sent that out month after month, you would be the same things over and over. But there's always a conduit for feedback. We welcome that, especially though when the forms are released in October, between that October and the January date. That's new this year. That's really gonna be your critical opportunity for feedback. Now, medical marijuana might be a little different because it's going into effect November 1st. And there just is still a lot of unknowns out there. We'll hear something from a legislator one day and something from another legislator the next day. And you've still got the federal prohibition.
Yeah.
So we're trying to look at how other states have handled it. The implementation's really fast. Something like that might be a special form we do, that we don't wait till the next normal round of implementation. But in that way, of course, we'd always welcome feedback. But OAR is there and sharing at every meeting. So you can always funnel your comments through them, or just contact us directly too. So.
One other issue, Charlie, you kind of touched on it earlier, and I think this is important for people to know, is wire fraud. I know the committee's kind of touched on looking at wire fraud, kind of some sort of form. just recently I saw an article where a realtor was held responsible and liable for over $200,000 because they forwarded fraudulent wiring instructions, and the volume of this has gone through the roof. So can you touch on what the forms committee is doing in that?
Sure, we'll probably have a separate form that's just a disclosure form that you would have your clients sign that talks about what cyber fraud is, that what instructions they will or won't receive from you, what emails are okay to respond to, and they're very sophisticated now. I mean, I know we've had a couple of cases here in Oklahoma, but it really looks legit. They know the company logo, they know the property address, they know the contract amount. It's really frightening. So it would probably just be more of an optional form. We're looking at the ones that California and Texas have done, as well as also some broker forms. But I think we're gonna work on that next month, and we hope to have it out in January.
So on our closing minutes here, unless there's any other burning questions, I would like each of the panel members to give just a little closing statement on kind of what's coming down the pipeline. What do you think is an important issue for you on the contract forms committee in the next year or so, besides Terry going to get off?
Vote for me to get off. My burning issue is something that when I've had the opportunity to get in front of you and your associates across the state talking about the contracts, is the fact that in my experience, the vast majority of all contractual challenges and disputes and problems stems because the associates on both sides of the table are getting after each other and they're complicating things. And I would just like to emphasize that when I help make changes or improvements or adjustments to these contracts, I'm doing it in the sense of keeping the buyer and the seller on a fair, even keel as they process a purchase contract. And I would like to see us brokers educate our associates that they are probably, in the vast majority of the cases, the associates are not contracting with a buyer or a seller other than what our broker relationship law dictates right now, which is that we're in the middle of the road, guys. Every associate across the state keep getting on one side of the fence or the other because they still have a attitude of that they're a agent for a party, and they are not unless they have so contracted. And if we would just get our associates to help a buyer fill out the form without interjecting adverse situations into the contract, I think the majority of our contractual problems would go away.
I just have, as far as the substantive changes that the committee is making this year, I'm very excited about the addressing the earnest money issues that we've done and coming up with the seller's right to cancel if the earnest money's not there. I'm also really excited about the new earnest money receipt. I think it's a lot simpler, but it also handles almost every situation you can think of. One thing that hasn't been brought up that I want to mention, and a lot of people forget about this, but you know the contract pamphlet, that long document that describes in plain language all of the provisions of the contract. The real estate commission staff they work really hard to keep that up every year with all the changes that we do. And I, as a broker, as a managing broker, I have found that to be a really valuable tool with my brand new agents because it talks about the contract in language they can understand. And I just wanted to remind you of that tool and to make good use of it because the commission staff works really hard to make sure that that's in conformance with the current forms. So anyway, that's mine.
Is that available on the website?
Oh, yes. I call it Contract Information War and Peace because it's not a pamphlet. It's very long. But it is very informative. And thank you, Keith, for those compliments to staff. I wish I could take them, but if you ever encounter Clifford best rep in our office, Contract Rockstar. This is just a Charla opinion, not an official OREC opinion, but I continue to be intrigued with the thought of mandating the purchase contract. I think it would help with education issues. I feel like we've kind of tiptoed close to it sometimes. It would require a monetary investment on the part of OREC, but then we would be actually charged with legally defending the contract if it were mandated. Again, I think that's going to take a big movement on behalf of the industry though, but it's something I remain intrigued by.
I want to thank all the panel members for coming up and taking the arrows from the audience. And thank you guys for your engagement for a lot of great time.
Probably one of the bigger questions we get about property management. I continually hear from brokers, I don't want to do property management. Well, you know, there are certain towns, particularly college towns, we heard a lot in Stillwater and Norman. Isn't it great to be in Norman? Last time I came to an OAR, I was in Stillwater. I still have PTSD from the Pistol Pete thermostat in my room. But at any rate, you're in the college towns, your associates are going to want to do rental properties. As a broker, educate yourself on that. Know what you're doing, because the other thing we see is if the broker won't do it, the associate will try to sneak out on their own and do it. And that's a recipe for disaster. You don't want that. I could talk an hour about property management. That probably wouldn't leave you any time for questions. A more recent issue, number 8, earnest money. Do I have a contract if I don't have earnest money? Now, when I'm done, we'll have an excellent contract panel who will answer all your contract questions. But, so I know y'all are gonna talk about this, I don't wanna steal your thunder too much, but you have a contract even if the earnest money isn't there. A lot of associates tend to think otherwise. So it's gonna be an education issue maybe for brokers, that they need to be aware. Doesn't matter if I have the earnest money or not, this contract is executed when we both sign it. And I know that the Contract Forms Committee or panel is going to talk about that, so I will let them answer your questions on that. Number 9, paying referral fees. Who can I pay a referral fee to? In Oklahoma, you can't pay a referral fee to someone who's not licensed. However, there is one exception in our code and rules specifically for renters in an apartment complex. If they refer another renter to you, you can pay them a referral fee, but it's capped at $100. But if you have a past client who refers a new seller to you and you want to slide them a gift card, you can't do that. Now, there was some confusion a couple of years ago. An instructor had gone out and said you can't take referral fees from out-of-state licensees or pay them to out-of-state licensees. You can. So if you've heard that out there, I just want to clarify it. I think that was up in Tulsa, so we got a lot of questions on that at the time, so I would just want to clarify that. And finally, the last question we get is questions about the contract forms in general. And I know that that's kind of broad, but we get so many calls at the commission, what do I put in this box? Or if I want X to happen, what do I need to write here? So I'll just remind you, the commission staff cannot give you legal advice on a contract. At the end of the day, I'm not going to be the final arbitrator of the contract, and neither is your broker. If there's a problem with the contract, a judge is going to be the final arbitrator of that. So that kind of segues into what I would like to close with, which is just kind of a general perspective on broker supervision. Because we get calls from associates who want to know about their contract, and I'll say, well, have you talked to your broker? And this is actually 2 real-life conversations I've had. I don't know who my broker is, can you tell me? Or the other one I get is, I'm scared of my broker and I don't want them to know I don't know. Now, I would say those are outliers, but they literally have both happened in the past few months. So, brokers, just, I think understanding of the contract has fallen off a lot because you used to sit down and go over it with a party line by line on paper, or at least paragraph by paragraph. You would explain the contract And you did that so often that you knew it. Well, if there's a newer associate and they're using one of the online forms, I know when I did my last contract, you know, I think it was .loop, check here, check here, check here. Some of those associates may not have ever sat down and gone through the contract with the intent of trying to explain it to a party. So that might be a good broker education session. Try that with your new associates. It's good practice for the brokers too. The contract changes all the time, as the panel will attest. So, you know, as brokers, just do your part. At least introduce yourself. I know that's not the norm, but make sure your associates know who you are and try not to be too scary. Maybe not play the Darth Vader theme music in your office, which I do all the time. Those are our top 10 issues. I have a few minutes for questions if it's okay, Amy. Yeah, okay. Joe, did you have a question?
I do.
Okay.
How do we get more commercial brokers involved in what's going on right here today?
Here at the summit or at the commission or?
I look around, I don't know. I think I'm the only one here.
I know there are other people here who do commercial. Brad's up there. Hi, Brad.
That only do commercial real estate?
Brad only does commercial.
Brad and I, two of us?
Well, and I will say this, for the first time in a really long time, we have a commercial member on the Real Estate Commission now. Dr. David Chapman, who's fabulous. I think y'all have heard him at your board of directors meeting, but I'm very excited about that because it's not a large percentage of our licensees if you broke it down, but when it's not, who do solely commercial. So when a case comes that's commercial, I'd rather have that input on the commission. So I am excited about that. He's going to do some classes for us. For a long time, way back in the olden days, in the 90s, you know, commercial people didn't want to be involved. I remember when broker relationships passed commercial, people were like, we don't have to do that. So for a while, it was kind of like that's our little world. I know OAR has been very active with their commercial group, getting that started up. So Joe, you just recruit them and drag them here. Just scare them. Play your Darth Vader music. Steve, did you have a question?
Yes. I started to type it in Slido, but I'm going to just ask you.
I'm not, you know, I can't even work Tumblr. Why do you think I'm going to use Slido?
Because Nabil will do it for you. On a social media cover photo, you mentioned the broker reference being there. Is that only required if the associate's reference is in the photo as well?
Right, right.
Okay.
If the associate's reference is not there and it's just a picture of a house, we kind of not consider that advertising if it's a generic real estate picture there. So.
Thank you.
And again, you know, one of the things we are working on that I forgot to mention, we're trying to put a manual together, kind of like a good Facebook page and a bad Facebook page. So that is something we hope to work on for ads, car wraps, billboards, social media, things like that. So hopefully that's something we'll be able to do this year.
Thank you.
Judy?
Okay, associates business page, John Doe Realtor. In our office, we tell them the name of the page has to be John Doe Realtor at Metro First Realty. Are we being too harsh, too anal?
You know, you're asking the regulator.
Well, that's what a rep says it has to be.
My code and rules are your minimum. And I've said a couple of things here that are best practices. You would probably not, that would be something we would look at right away and be like, this is okay. So I would say it's a best practice, but not required.
Okay.
I'll give you a gold star sticker. Okay. Yes, ma'am?
One thing I would like to mention, OREC and the Code of Ethics both have social media requirements and you have to meet both.
Yes, yes. I would not be the expert to speak to on Code of Ethics, but you do want to meet both of those in all your advertising.
Charla, we have a question that came in through Slido, and the question is it a realistic expectation of a broker to monitor social media when they have more than 100 realtors? It would be a full-time job.
Well, I will say our law requires broker supervision, and you chose as a broker to have 100 associates. Don't take on 100 associates if you can't supervise them. Someone's probably mad at me now. See, I don't know who asked. Slido. It is a good question, and oh, they're popping up. Do you want me to go on to those?
Yes.
Realtor logo, I don't know the requirements for that. I'm sorry.
It's
We
not
don't
required.
require the Realtor logo.
Neither does NAR.
So, I'm gonna say we don't require that from the real
Goes
estate
to code of ethics, it'll answer the question.
Yes, code of ethics, thank you, Pam. Is there any plan to shorten the time frame for investigations? Yes. I will say this, people who get in trouble think investigations go way too fast and are way too punitive. People who turn people in think investigations take forever and we never do anything. So balance that out in your head. I will say, we're going to have 3 full-time investigators, which we haven't had in a while. We did have 3 at one point a while back. We're about to have 3 full-time investigators in addition to the auditor. So we had a few staff changes that did kind of slow things down, but I will say, cases where money is missing result in summary suspensions typically, and those kind of take precedent over an advertising violation. It's not perfect, it's unfortunate, and also in our statutes in the state of Oklahoma, there are certain deadlines and timeframes we have to meet. They get notice every step of the way, and they have to receive so many days' notice before we can do the hearing. And then if they want to delay for whatever reason, as we would with any licensee, typically we will give them time to prepare their case and talk to their attorney. I know it seems like it's taking a long time. We don't have too many that have drug on a year. There are a couple I can think of, but part of that's just balancing the cases that could cause a greater harm to the public, and we've had some juicy ones in the last 3 years. Since I don't see any more questions coming in, I'm just gonna turn this off. Just to remind you, if you want to hear of any juicy cases, our commission typically meets on the 2nd Wednesday of every month. You can check our website to confirm that we're meeting at 9:30, 2nd Wednesday at our offices, and you get free required CE. So you get a hot topic. So feel free to come by and see what we're doing, get to know us. We're not scary. We're not Darth Vader. I should have played some happy music. So.
You do have to pre-register or something, right?
You don't have to pre-register.
To get seated.
And in October, we're actually holding our meeting in conjunction with the OAR conference downtown. So we're actually doing ours on Tuesday, October 9th. It's technically the day before the conference starts, but Board of Directors is that next morning. So if you're going to have to come in anyway and spend the night, why not come to the OREC meeting? And I promise it is going to be a good one. Lots of great discussion. So I hope to see you there. And Amy, I'll turn it over to you for contact forms.
Thank you, Charla.
Thank you very, very much. And I wish that, I'd had time to think this through. I would have done it Family Feud style. Make y'all guess what the top issues are. But in no particular order, let's start with number 1, buyer inducements. Is it okay to do a contest on Facebook, like this page, and be entered to win a Yeti? Is it okay to do a mail out with a meal coupon? Now, our code and rules have been in place for quite some time. And one of the more evergreen provisions, if you will, it prohibits any lottery, contest, or giveaway that would influence a buyer or a prospective buyer. Now, the way that's written, anyone could be a prospective buyer in theory, because it could be anyone that might want to buy in the future. So the way the law is now, any of those things, any and all of those things would be illegal. No contest, no lotteries, no giveaways. However, as I mentioned, that's a really old provision in our code and rules, and a little bit of history on it. Back when Midwest City was developed, the gentleman who developed that, he gave a pony if you bought a house. So I don't know if any of y'all sell in that area. Have you ever noticed that the lots are bigger over there? I've heard that's for the ponies. I don't know. Maybe those buyers were easily influenced by a pony. But as times have changed, and you're seeing a lot more of that marketing on Facebook, we're trying to look in the future at, am I influencing you to buy a specific property, or am I influencing you to use my services as a realtor? And one is advertising, one is actually inducing a buyer. So we're looking at amending that statute, maybe in 2019. That's been something we're working on. And for a while, we were holding some of these advertising cases in abeyance, just to wait and see what was gonna happen. However, it had kind of turned into the wild, wild west in the marketplace. So people had heard, oh, well, if you're not gonna open that case, I'm just gonna induce away. So at our last commission meeting, the commissioners decided to go ahead and pursue those cases because we can't guarantee that the statute will change. Just know that it's something we're working on and it will require a legislative fix. And in looking at that, we're just trying to kind of balance the marketplace out. We don't want to be punitive. And it does seem punitive to go after someone who has a like this page contest, as opposed to buy this house and get a pony. So that might be something you see in future legislative sessions. The next issue number 2, advertising and the broker reference. How big does my broker reference have to be? And the answer is, I don't have a number. Our code and rules has 3 words in it that you probably could all recite with me from memory. Prominent, conspicuous, and easily identifiable. In other words, you know it when you see it. Now there are literally ads, because we will talk about this in the office and investigations will bring them to me, and I'm literally laughing because I can't find the broker reference. I'm like, let me get my magnifying glass. Where is it? So while we don't have a size for it now, that's something else the commission is looking at. In Texas, the broker reference has to be 50% or larger than any other individual reference, which would be broker reference, team reference, associate reference, etc. That is something we're looking at, again for 2019, but that would be a rule change. We get asked all the time. I think there are mixed feelings about that out there. Some people want a number. Some people prefer to have that discretion, but just to create some sort of standard, because I feel like we get into a lot of arguments about, you can clearly see it, when I literally cannot see it. So that's something you might want to look for in the future. Issue number 3, something new at OREC that we're working on is team names. And we get questions a lot. What can I call my team? Well, first and foremost, most of y'all are brokers in here, right? It's the Broker Summit. All team names must be approved by the broker. And you, as the broker, are responsible for keeping a registry of the team names that are in use within your office. And you're required to provide that to us anytime we ask. So step 1 would be get your team name approved by the broker. The team name cannot be identical to any other team name in the state, but it can also not be identical to any name of an entity that is registered with the OREC. An entity just means office. So if there's an office out there called Awesome Amy Real Estate, you can't name your team Awesome Amy Real Estate. Before the team conducts any licensed activities, and that includes advertising. So before you go out and put up a website with your team name or you create that Facebook page, you need to register that team with the OREC. It's a very simple form. It's a one-time registration fee of $100. You don't have to renew that. It's a permanent registration. Unless you're worried about someone stealing your team name, it's illegal for a brokerage to register a team name that is not being used within the brokerage. So that's kind of a new process. We started that in November. We still see some team names out there that aren't registered. So if your team name is not registered, remind your associates to take care of that. You as the broker need to get that taken care of.
Charla,
All right. Yes, sir.
Are you gonna do questions at the beginning?
If I have time.
Okay.
I should have time.
Okay.
Maybe not from you, Joe. Get my askers. I'll do it at the end, so you'll hold on to that. Question 4, disclosure of my license status. When is it required? In other words, when do I need to disclose that I'm a licensee? In all advertising, you're supposed to have your broker's reference. which is a disclosure that you're licensed. But if you're selling a property that you have ownership in or any interest in, you need to disclose your license status and that it's a broker owner in your advertising. And it also needs to be in the contract with your license number. And in our contract, in our standard clauses, there's an option there that you can pick that language and insert it in. The other disclosure that you need to be careful of is if you're representing an immediate family member. And, oh gosh, I can't remember the legal word for it, congenuity? I'm looking at Jeff, he's a lawyer, he should know these legal words. As Amy mentioned, I was with OAR almost 17 years before I went to work for the Real Estate Commission. And when Jessica Dietrich invited me, we talked about the top 10 questions that we get at the Real Estate Commission, or the issues that we face. It's kind of weird because that's 22 years and some of those hot topics remain the same. There are some new ones, but sometimes it seems like it's the same issues over and over and over. And before I give you the official list,